Tucker and Dale versus Evil.
Oh, God, what a great movie.
This one, it's weird because Tucker and Dale also had a really fascinating backstory as to why it happened. The movie actually got released because of piracy. One of the few examples we have of that, where it got made, it got shelved, it got pirated like crazy, it got an insane amount of buzz, and everybody's like, okay, well, we won't scrap it, and then put it out like years after it was made.
I did not know that.
Is one of the few examples we have of them like, oh yeah, piracy actually helped this thing. By the way, I don't support piracy. Don't think I am. Just, it's a fun story.
It is.
But Tucker and Dale, for those that haven't seen it, follows two stereotypically redneck men and a group of 20-something college students who we gather. They keep saying Omega Beta over and over again, so we have Omega Beta and probably girls from the sister sorority. They all come out to the woods to hook up and do the normal 20-somethings in the woods do. So we get that red herring with, oh, Tucker and Dale are going to be the murderers because they're rednecks, and they end up being totally nice people. And there's just a comedy of errors that leads to this becoming a horror movie.
Oh my God, yes. They do a very good job of changing that perspective, because when it does start off, you've got the typical van scene like you might have seen in
Texas Chainsaw is the first one that pops out for that.
Just driving down the road, listening to their music, everybody's happy, and then you see the evil rednecks stop off at a gas station, and all suddenly now camera's not focused on the college kids, focused on the rednecks. And one of them is played by Alan Tudyk. Mm-hmm. Who is amazing, and his stock has risen tremendously in the last few years. He had like that cult status because of being on Firefly and then the movie Serenity that followed it. But he's done so much stuff with Disney and voiceover work, and his stock has just been constantly on the rise. So it is awesome to see him in this movie, because he's great. Pretty much everything he does. And it makes you wonder, too, how much different movies would be if they just... what if you just reshot this film from the other people's perspective?
Honestly, Alec Tudyk was my selling point on this movie. I was like, oh, obviously I have to watch it. Yeah, we do totally flip, and they start following the rednecks, and it becomes this, you're seeing things from both perspectives. You're seeing the information Tucker and Dale have, and then you're seeing the information that the college kids do and do not have, and how it just totally reframes the perspective. Because I analyzed this one specifically for its miscommunications of, if this weren't as gory as it is, it would probably be shown in communications classes along with 12 Angry Men, because let's face it, we need to retire 12 Angry Men, as fabulous as it is. It just can't be the only movie that does this.
That's a good point, too. Especially considering, and this is one of the things that the movie does, much to its credit, that I think really separates it from anything else of its ilk that I've seen, in that they're really trying to make it so, don't want to give anything away, but for the longest time they're trying to make sure there's no antagonist, because you really have two separate camps of innocent people who are just misunderstood.
Exactly.
And they balance that really well, because even though the heart of this film is Dale, by all means the heart is Dale, and they do a great job of framing him as that, and Tucker as his best friend, who's a little more salty towards life, and for good reason too, with what happens to this poor fucker.
Yeah, I would say them talking to the cops is probably one of my top horror scenes ever, or like it's one of my top comedy moments ever. I die every time. I don't care how many times I've seen this movie.
And like I said, they need to make sure they don't, cast the characters as sinister or evil or wishing ill will towards them, because if you do that, you lose the point of the film. You walk a delicate line when you do something like that, and that you gotta give a lot of credit, not just to the screenwriters for that, but to the actors and the actresses for their performances. Because it's really easy as an actor to either instill something into the performance that wasn't intended in the script, or if the director doesn't fully rein that in, you got the cast that you got, and you gotta try to make that work. Perfect reason why Tudyk was so well cast as Tucker, because he does capture that very genial vibe in everything he's done. And then much to Dale's credit too, played by Tyler Labine, he is perfectly likable as well, despite his his very rugged appearance, he just looks like a teddy bear that you want us to go and hug.
Yes, with my friends group, essentially, most of them look like Dale. So I have that personal connection to his character of, like, you all look menacing and terrifying, but you're actually teddy bears that love to sit here and pet my cats.
When it comes to comedy horror, I think this is the subset of the genre that really requires better acting than the genre itself normally gets credited for. Because we too often have the horror tropes of, you know, the scream queen or the human target that's just there to be killed. Doesn't require a lot of acting, and if it does, it's mostly just kind of physical grunt work. But when you're trying to carry comedic timing and instill that into the movie, you need to have acting chops. With the cast they got, Katrina Bowden, who was on 30 Rock, is also in this film as the kind of the central female character. And she also does a very good job of being likable and completely confused by why her friends are now suddenly trying to kill her new friends that have kind of saved her life, and the misunderstanding that goes on between all of them.
Yeah, and the whole peacemaker trying and all that, it really boils down to essentially two totally different fish out of water stories, where you have this group in an element that they're not used to, and you have this other group in an element that they're very used to, but they're seeing this foreign force that they don't quite understand, and it does go where it kind of should. It just goes haywire from that.
Oh man, it does such a wonderful job of all of it too. I'm so glad that this movie actually did get its release, because it's something that, if I'm going to encourage people to watch anything that is a subversion of horror, this is going to be in that top 10, maybe top 5 of horror subversions.
I'm trying to remember the director's name. He did, like, A Mighty Wind, Best in Show, all of that. He has that...
Christopher Guest.
Yeah, and he has that blonde character he always casts, and he points out what a fabulous actress she is, because you have to be really smart to play really stupid. And that's what we get here. We have them overshooting every single horror trope and making it to the point where it is so ludicrous that it becomes completely understandable again.
I love how they keep saying that, you know, these goddamn college kids kill ourselves all over my property.
These college kids keep coming here and killing themselves. What?
If you have not watched this movie, we have not revealed any good chunk of it.
Yeah, no, it is a fantastic movie. This is one I definitely could gush about for quite some time, because it hit everything it should have perfectly. It hit the horror elements the way it should, or it hit the comedic elements the way it should have. And the horror elements, yes, they were there. It is absolutely a horror film. I haven't really seen anybody trying to argue this isn't a horror film, which is always a big back and forth in the genre, because it hit those elements that it chose to use perfect.
Some of the deaths that occur are pretty surprising. Like, they can come out of nowhere. One involves a tree. Yeah, it's pretty surprising when that happens. Some of them are telegraphed comically, which adds to the funny factor. But yeah, there's a couple that just kind of come out of nowhere, and you're like, oh, holy shit. Things escalated quickly.
Yeah, because it taps into that childhood thing of, I think everybody's played the game Telephone, and how quickly that message breaks down, and how quickly people misinterpret one thing or another, and just how bad that can go when it goes real bad.
Yeah, and the movie knows this as well. This isn't just some, like, sort of accidental commentary that's being made after the fact. The movie knows full well that this is about communication breakdown and what happens when your perspective is limited. So it's really smartly written at the same time that it's subversively funny.
Yeah, and then, like, admitting if they told this to somebody else, they wouldn't. It happens in horror films all the time where they're like, well, why don't you just call the cops? It's like, well, I can't call the cops because relaying all of the events that just happened is like, would you believe me? Because this is unbelievable. And that's an element that always has to play in for these things to suspend your disbelief. And Tucker and Dale just overemphasized that. This is why we can't get help, because no one's going to buy this.
And it turns out that, well, You'll find out if you watch, because there is a cop that enters, like you said. You get a great scene, and you need to watch for the reaction to everything that unfolds. It's fantastic.
Yeah, they certainly had a doozy of a day.
The one that I picked that sided more on the comedy than the horror, it is a kind of oft-forgotten movie. It's a bit of a cult classic. It's kind of funny how unknown it is considering the director behind it. But the movie I went with was The Frighteners, a 96 film that was directed by Peter Jackson, and also written by him as well. If that name sounds familiar, you probably know it from all of the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings films, because, that's the guy who was responsible for them. Some people who might be familiar with him entirely from those don't realize that this guy is a sick motherfucker when it comes to his love of gore.
Yes.
His early films are absolutely amazing in terms of what he's done to just make things as gore-filled as possible.
He wrote what is, by a lot of people, still considered to be one of the goriest scenes in horror, just because of the amount of blood splatter. I've always wanted to see Monster Vision, if it ever came back to do this, just because I want to see Joe Bob Briggs with the drive-in stats for it.
Oh man, I loved Monster Vision when it was on TNT. I'm glad somebody else remembers that show.
Oh no, I loved it. That's actually what my first exposure to horror was, when I officially could kind of sneak it.
I remember one time, I don't know why, but they were showing Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory on Monster Vision. And I thought it was fantastic. Just listening to him describe the film and the cutaways and everything. And he actually gave some really insightful stories about it, as he was oft able to do. But just not one of those ones that you expect, I'm going to turn on Monster Vision. Gene Wilder? It's not Young Frankenstein.
I'm kicking myself right now because I can't remember who wrote it, but there was somebody who was talking about a presentation of Willy Wonka like that, where it was on the late night kind of horror hosted thing, and the next morning it was on with the kids block, and he's like, just the framing of that movie, you can flip it so quick.
The Frighteners cannot be flipped so easily.
Oh no.
But it's a really creative comedy horror. It stars Michael J. Fox, partially what lends it to the comedy side, and he's really strong in this movie, as he is in most things. He plays a psychic detective of sorts called Frank Bannister, who sees dead people. The guy's a genuine deal, but he's also a con man, in that he will specifically target certain people, send some of the ghosts who he's friends with to terrorize them, and then perform a mock exorcism. So we already have a character who is likable because he's Michael J. Fox, but he's not necessarily a really good guy. So we're already on kind of this uneven footing, and we don't know how to feel about things. And then things escalate pretty quick as we dive into this world, some of the mechanics of it, and how the spiritual realm is interacting with actual Earth, and it turns into a really imaginative serial killer story. That's not a sentence I would normally hear myself saying. It's like, that's an imaginative serial killer right there.
Oh no, yeah, I couldn't agree more on this one. I realize I'm talking to a non-horror audience mostly right now. This was actually included on my list of movies for people that don't like horror, because this hits that comedic element well enough, and the horror elements, I'm not dogging on the special effects, but you have to realize this was 90s CG,
yes.
And it wasn't even good for 90s CG with the representation of the ghosts, and that was clearly done intentionally because it takes away that spookiness of there's a ghost and limbs are falling off. It makes it almost comedic.
Yeah, though I will say that the antagonist in the film, don't want to give too much away, but we do have a very Grim Reaper-like figure, and the awkward CG around him does kind of make it a more unsettling presence.
Yeah, there are those times something that was so new and kind of being perfected really adds to things. Think of the audio in M, because sound was still kind of new at the time, and that really nasty quality to it completely adds to the film at this point, and that's exactly the way the CG works in here.
And I'm going to go and say this, and this might be a controversial statement to some people, I don't know who they would be, but I think this is one of Dee Wallace's best performances in her entire career in this movie.
Yeah, I absolutely, this is definitely one of my favorite comedies. This is an October staple. We cannot get out of October without watching this movie at least once.
Give Peter Jackson credit here for coming up with this concept and really pushing it forward as a co-writer and director. And the cast that he pulls in to work on this are fantastic. A lot of credit I need to give to Jeffrey Combs for his character of Officer Dammers, who is batshit crazy in some of the best possible ways.
It hits, again, all those elements perfectly, and we had that cast, we had the star power. Honestly, this is probably the only movie I would say I've seen from Michael J. Fox that I actually enjoy. He's never drawn me one way or the other in terms of his ability. I won't see a movie because of him, but I also won't not see a movie because of him.
I think one of the reasons why it works well for him here is that he's generally seen, thanks to Family Ties, Back to the Future, all that stuff, as a likable protagonist. Tom Hanks, early Tom Hanks, another perfect example of that.
Yeah.
When you're going to give a character a slightly sinister story behind him, or make him a little bit, give him some unlikable traits, you still need to root for the protagonist. You need to have that as kind of your ground of entry for the viewer. By bringing somebody in like Michael J. Fox, you have that kind of pre-established attachment that people can form to him. So you know that, okay, well, this guy's obviously going to be the good guy, despite the fact he's a con man, because it's Michael J. Fox.
Yeah, and they did do a fabulous job of world building and establishing this universe in a genre where we really don't expect to see a whole lot of world building. We just kind of assume it's taking place in our reality. When you bring in this, no ghosts are totally real, people accept that, he accepts that. People that can't see them obviously deny them, but that's kind of similar to how our world works. And you took this old horror trope of I can see ghosts or this thing is haunted and told it from a completely different perspective.
We have a unique villain in this film, too, with a motive that is pretty clear and sinister, legitimately a sinister way of going about things and means to that end that works very well in the context of the universe that's been built, given the rules that we know of it.
I saw this when I was younger and first getting into the genre, and while I wouldn't say it scared me, which is not an indictment when it comes to horror for me, it doesn't have to scare somebody to be horror. We get that protagonist and we get his motives, and it's not out now, it's gonna try and frighten you. It's just, wow, this guy is really, really evil.
Yeah, very much so. And I think the more that, if you know true crime and you study serial killers, it actually does add more to that sinister vibe that he has, because his motivations are grounded in a sense of reality. He compares himself to Starkweather. He literally has those roots tied to things that we can understand in our world, and it's transposed into this one. And I think that's also what really helps draw his character out.
Yeah, I absolutely agree on that, and those grounded elements in the world building is probably part of why it was so successful, is we have these things we can relate to. And it didn't fall into that good guy good, bad guy bad thing, where yes, he is really, really evil, but as you said, he has motivations, he has this grounded basis. It's just a motivation that you have to run through a crazy filter to kind of understand. And then you have a guy who is honestly trying to do well in the world, but has to take a bad path, and sometimes you have to do that. People can relate to that. It's what most of us have to do.
And he also has a character shift that we see in him, too, when he realizes that something awful is truly going on here. And suddenly the priorities of other people take precedence over his own. So we do have a bit of a character journey, too, which is nice to see, and you normally don't see in horror movies. You normally don't see a character journey at all. The character journey is survive.
Mm-hmm.
And this is more than that. This is about his growth as a person, as well as trying to survive these terrors that are befalling the community that he's in.
Well, yeah, the survive trope is there, and sometimes it leads to no character development, but when it's truly done well, it leads to that journeyman's quest that we all know is an archetype through literature and film and all of that, of this thing became this life-altering experience, instead of it just being I closed a door, turned on a light, and had a shift in personality.
Yeah, the only criticism I will levy about this film is that the primary female lead, played by Trini Alvarado, Dr. Linsky, is a really weak female character in terms of her role in the film. She's mostly playing a wife, a widow, and then a love interest. She maybe contributes at least once to the story in that she has access to a cryo lab, and I won't explain anything more than that, but that's about all she really contributes to it. And then just kind of fumbles around for the rest of the film and doesn't do anything. She's very ineffective. Dee Wallace, on the other hand, just nails her character of Patricia, and more reason to watch that because she's fantastic in this.
Oh yeah, absolutely love Dee Wallace. She also a fabulous human being.
Yeah, I got to meet her, and she was very, very sweet.
Yeah, I met her as well, and I compared her because I was trying to explain to my husband because he was in line for Malcolm McDowell, and we just divided and conquered on that one. And I told him, I'm like, the only person I can think to describe Dee Wallace as is she's like your grandmother if she did horror movies and crystals, and being compared to his grandmother is a colossal compliment in our, like, yeah, that she has, like, deity status for all of us. She just was a fabulous human being. But, Dee Wallace is just absolutely incredible in this film, and the main lead character at one point does, it's not much, but it's she kind of gave the carrot on a stick to Michael J. Fox's character of maybe you need to get together and fix it. It's overdone to all death, but she did at least contribute that little bit.
Yeah, and she seems to move on from the death of her husband really, really fast.
But to be fair, they really set her husband up as a D-bag, especially during the restaurant scene.
Yeah, that's true. Though we never hear from his perspective of these things either. Like, we're just taking her word for it.
Yeah.
So it's a really funny scene, too.
And there's all these, like, just, yeah, the things he didn't know about her and all that. I'm like, how long have you guys been married? Because it doesn't even seem like they had been married that long.
He establishes he's 29. So even if they got married fairly young, it's still not a long marriage.
Yeah, it has been a long marriage, or at least a long courtship. I mean, maybe if they got together when it starts to be age-appropriate to date, and that's the only relationship they've ever had, which would explain all the problems in it, but they never really get into that.
A shout-out here, too, to John Astin, who plays the judge, a very decrepit ghost. John Astin, for most people who recognize that name, would associate him with the Addams Family. He was the original Gomez Addams in the TV series. And he's still alive and kicking. He was also the second Riddler in Batman. I think it was Frank Gorsuch who was the first one. But he's been in quite a few things. He does a wonderful turn here as a ghost who is way past his prime and has a wonderful... Two scenes in particular that are really great. One is more heartfelt, explaining the depth of the situation that is about to befall them. Another where he kind of gets his mojo back in every sense of that phrase.
He is a just very likable character, and I guess seeing this one, I was, preteen, and I was just kind of, I felt really attached to that character, and I really felt for him and was, like, rooting for him.
Yeah.
Like, no, you can do it!
It's a great film. I strongly recommend that. Maybe not as much as Tucker and Dale vs. Evil, but right up there. It's
really, really good for what it is, and again, that some people use that as an indictment, and I don't. It's just, these are the elements you're going to get. You're going to get a comedy horror with an emphasis on the comedic, and it did that particular thing very, very well.
Well then, now we get to what we consider to be the perfect mix of the horror and the comedy. And which one did you come up with for this list?
I used Hatchet 2. In the first one, we do get a good dose of dark comedy and one-liners to kind of break tension. 2 is really where they hit that stride between comedy and horror. And I would go a little further and even say 3, if you are a horror fan, and can catch all of the in-jokes, the references, the cameos, also rides that line really well, but you need that backing. Because the weird thing about the Hatchet franchise is it rests on your typical haunted area story. There's a swamp, it's closed off, and people keep saying this mythical figure is haunting it. So what Hatchet does is the first one is them going into the swamp. The second one is the events that happened after they go to the swamp, and the third one is the day after that.
Oh, okay.
So it's 3 straight days.
I saw the first one, but I didn't know much about anything that followed it in terms of the chronology or anything, because I wasn't really inspired to see the second one, but it sounds like it took a bit of a shift here in tone.
Well, you know how the first one ends very abruptly on that weird cut?
Yes.
The reason it ends so abruptly on that weird cut, and it doesn't make sense unless you watch the second one picks up literally the other half of that cut.
Oh.
Which is kind of funny because they switched lead actresses between the first and second. There's been a myriad of rumors as to why, which Adam Green, who directed this, was actually kind of classy about the entire thing because people kept saying the lead actress got on drugs, and he's just like, don't read IMDb. I'm not going to sit here and talk about it, but I'm not going to gossip either. I kind of gained a lot of respect for him because the lead actress was replaced with Danielle Harris, who is the massive scream queen at the moment.
And she actually, to her credit, has been for a while now.
Oh yeah, she's probably what most people consider this generation's scream queen because she got started in Halloween 4? I'm trying to remember which one the kid came in.
I think it was 4.
She came in there, so she has this horror legacy behind her, and even having Danielle in it is a reference unto itself. Of you get all these jokes and references. Even the third one, there's a point where they're explaining the events of the past 2 days, kind of harking back to Tucker and Dale versus Evil, of how unbelievable it sounds. And the guy even says, that is the most contrived, shoddy piece of writing I could ever possibly think of. And it cuts to somebody else that is the director doing Hitchcock moment, where he kind of looks offended. Where they'll make fun of themselves, they'll make fun of the horror elements, but it's still totally taken as a horror film. There's gory kills, there's a horrific atmosphere, there's all of this. There's a guy that even repeatedly appears in all 3 of them, but he plays slightly different people each time.
Well, that's cool. I love those little touches, the casting gags like that tend to be pretty funny.
On the third one, he even says something about, oh, you gotta look like this guy. And he's like, oh, so all Asians look the same because he's Asian. So there's all these like little in-jokes. It isn't giving away any plot, but if you were watching each thing, especially all together, it makes perfect sense and flows. It's taking a very basic premise and going, okay, we've done this to death. Let's have a little bit of fun with it while still keeping the elements that keep this relevant.
Considering talking about the second film, could you give a brief, spoiler-free plot description of the original Hatchet that would set up some of what to expect in this one?
Okay, essentially what happens is there is a group of guys in New Orleans that decide to 2 of them decide to break off from the group, go on a swamp tour boat, because New Orleans, even though it's during Mardi Gras. He's like, no, I just want to relax and be away from people and da-da-da. They get on a boat. You find out later it was an illegal tour because they're in the swamp that was shut down, and things just go south from there because of the legend of the ghost. The first film, the tour guide on the boat doesn't have all of the stories memorized quite yet. So when he's telling the origin story of this malicious swamp being, he just goes, well, anywho, he died. And it's like something like that. It's just enough to break this horror element and remind you, it's like, okay, this isn't real. Let's have a little bit of fun with this.
That frames things pretty well then. The third one, you said, the more you know about horror, the more you know about film, the more you're going to get out of that one.
Yeah, it revolves around what happens after the events of the second one and the survivors of the second one, because there's always survivors. I don't count that as a spoiler. Trying to take care of what is going on in the swamp. Okay. And this causes more people to come to the swamp, that's where you get the cameos.
Gotcha.
because even non-horror people, Jason Trost was in it, which he's not really a horror guy. He did the FP and All Superheroes Must Die, I believe is the title of that film. And you just know him from his eye patch.
Any other closing thoughts on Hatchet 2?
I think I've gone as far as I can with that one without spoiling it, unfortunately, because I did realize after I started talking, I was like, oh god, this is really hard to explain if you haven't seen the first one, because it literally picks up mid-shot.
Well, yeah, and don't want to give too much out of the way, but at least we got a summary of what to expect from one, so people can hopefully dive in and want to hit up the other.
Yeah, and that is a nice thing about the franchise, is it just one right after another. There's no real breaks like we normally see in horror, where the universe is set in the first one and then all these rule-breaking things happen and they just get further and further away from it as the series continues on. This one is just a lot of trial and error, and a lot of them trying to figure out how to deal with an element that there's no real backing way that's concrete to deal with.
Well, speaking of movies that have shifted in tone during the franchise and have changed their rules, my pick for what I feel was one of the best mixes of horror and comedy is the movie Tremors. The original, the first one, the franchise kind of falls apart from the horror aspect after that by all means. But the original one, the 1990 Kevin Bacon, Fred Ward, Michael Gross, amazing movie that I will never forget when we first got introduced to it as kids, when my mom picked it up from the video store, brought it home, and everybody absolutely fell in love with it, to the point where when they released the sequel to it 6 years later, and I saw it in like a catalog of some sort, I said, Dad, they made a sequel to Tremors. I go, holy fucking shit, we gotta go pick is it fucking out? And like, my dad never got that passionate over movies, but Tremors, he was there for it, man. Like, he couldn't wait.
Yeah, and if you were pulling out a catalog, I'm like, geez, that was probably in the VHS cost pretty penny days.
Yes, it was. Those were fun days.
Yeah, no, they definitely were.
But Tremors, if you haven't seen it, I actually did a retrospective of it with my friend Eric on a different Critical Cast for a Halloween special, and nobody watched it. So thanks, guys, for following up on that, but go watch that one too. For a quick summary, Tremors is about a group of people in Nevada, kind of a fictional valley called Perfection, and guess what? Things aren't perfect there. Things go pretty bad pretty fast, because they discover that there's these creatures that are causing disappearances, and of course, at first, they just know about either disappearances or odd deaths. Like, they find a guy who is on top of, like, an electrical wire tower, and he's just dead, hanging onto that tower, and they're confused, like, why the hell would a guy be dead up there? So instantly the horror tropes are coming into play, because and mysterious death is automatically a subject here, and things just kind of get worse from there with a couple of legitimate jump scares, like when they see a hat on the ground when they're going to inspect the farm of a guy named Old Fred, and they see Fred's hat and they lift it up, and Fred's head is there sticking out of the ground, just looking up, and they're shocked by it. We get a mild jump scare, but it's kind of fitting because it's good for the characters too. Like, it's in universe a legitimately good jump scare. Of course, the movie subverts this later when Earl steps into a gopher hole, and you think that he's gotten grabbed, and he's like, goddamn gopher holes!
There was actually a horror movie called Blood Beach that follows this premise almost exactly, but Tremors took it in that, like, horror, comedy, sci-fi direction, whereas Blood Beach was more just straight-up horror, because that one's never made it off VHS, to my understanding.
Tremors I don't know how Tremors made it so successful as it did, because it was an absolute flop at the box office.
It's weird, because Tremors is also, it was funny when you sent me your pics, Tremors is also one I didn't see till like a year or two ago. I remember being in an ex-boyfriend's house and they tried to watch it, and everybody was just being distracting. And the way people kept summarizing it to me over all of these years was this heavy sci-fi emphasis on this is how these things work and this is how this happens and that happens, and it just didn't sound like my thing. husband finally forced me to sit down and watch it. I was like, okay, now I get the appeal of this. What they do in the later installments, which is awesome, is they do go over the evolution of these things.
Yes.
They go over why they change. Makes perfect sense. But the first one is dealing with, we're going to establish this universe. We're going to have some fun with it. We're not going to take it way too seriously, but it's going to be just serious enough for you to understand the gravity of the situation these people are in.
Right, and it gives some mystery behind where these things came from, but it's not necessary to understand the plight of their situation.
Exactly. A lot of movies go down that road of they want to explain every teeny little thing, which is, I know, contradictory with what I was saying earlier, where people won't explain anything. But there's a balance you can hit, and this movie absolutely had that balance.
Yeah, and when we learn along with the characters, it's a good feeling. It can be frustrating when you're watching a movie and you already know something that the characters don't. You're kind of frustrated with their stupidity. Because, like I said, you already know what the problem or the solution is, and you're just waiting for them to realize it too. Not the case here. We legitimately are in the dark. We might have some theories or ideas if you haven't seen it for the first time, but you don't know what the hell's going on. You're just as lost as these guys are. So,
absolutely,
as they learn, we learn, and it gives us an anchoring in the universe that this is being built in. Along with a kind of, I don't know why we have this as children, but it seems everybody plays the game across countries and nations of the floor is lava.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
A different way that plays out in here too. When you find out about what these creatures are and how they hunt, you realize that movement on the ground is very much a dangerous thing. And that's something that, again, we kind of established to ourselves as kids of, move between objects without touching the floor, which is something they have to do. So we can relate to them. Even with just a simple situation like that, it's cool to have that kind of grounding.
It harks back to, I believe we were talking about this before we started recording, the creative problem solving.
Yes.
As children, that's us developing creative problem solving, and now we're seeing it hark back to real life, and a lot of very successful horror films hark back to something primal and innate in us as children.
To throw a monkey wrench into the mix here, we find out that problem solving is not just going on the characters' ends, it's going on the monsters' end as well, which creates a sense of rising action. Regardless of what people like to think about seeing the heroes win, it's really only effective when you pose a challenge to them. And that's what the creatures do, the graboids as they're called. They pose a legitimate challenge as the movie goes along, inventing new ways to stop them, or to try to capture their prey. And that's what makes it even more enjoyable of a ride to take, because the characters have to keep coming up with different ideas, they have to keep getting creative. Bert, for example, who's probably easily the breakout character of this series, was Michael Gross's Bert Gummer, who is hysterical and fantastic.
Have you seen the fifth one yet?
I have not seen the fifth one yet.
You absolutely need to. Just the direction things go. And I even when they hark back to Reba McEntire's character throughout the franchise, it's hilarious in regards to him.
I love in Tremors 2, where you find out that Heather, Reba McEntire's character, has divorced him. And he's explaining this to Fred Ward's character of Earl, and he says something along the lines of, she just couldn't find living with me to be a sustainable solution in a post-Cold War breakup of the Soviet Union. That's how insane Bert is. That he just broke down like he wasn't the same person after the Soviet Union collapsed.
Yeah, and I love the fact that they go that far with him and he becomes stronger. And it's great because neither end on this franchise stagnate at all. There's constant growth, there's constant development. It's, again, not doing that good guy good, bad guy bad, which we see a lot, unfortunately, now with comics. Where, when they transfer it into the cinematic universe and all the nuances you once had in this character becomes, no, I fight bad guys, and the bad guy is like, I'm a bad guy, hey! The motivations aren't laid out, and the motivations for the graboids, as basic and primal as they are absolutely clear. and what they will do to attain what they need is absolutely clear, and the evolution makes sense. And same with the characters of, oh, they're doing this now. Okay, I'm going to do this now.
To the movie's credit, and this doesn't give anything away if you haven't seen it yet, but it just dawned on me rewatching the first movie for this, no two graboids are defeated the same way.
Nope.
And I thought that was remarkable going back and watching. It's like they literally used a different solution or a variant thereof to kill each one of these things, and that is awesome when you think about it from a writing perspective and just from a monster movie perspective in general. That almost never happens.
Yeah, normally the more creative means of killing and the variations in killing are reserved more for the torture porn genre, which it doesn't have to be. You can absolutely be creative without being excessively gory or going and building this, God, what are those things called, where they're the machine that does an insane amount of things just to do a simple task.
Rube Goldberg.
Yeah, Rube Goldberg. It doesn't have to be like that. And when you were talking about learning with the characters, there's been an interesting, what immediately popped to my head is Evil Dead the Musical, because there's been a kind of interesting trend with that as of late, where it does throw in this tiny comedic element of somebody, how the way it worked in Evil Dead the Musical is when Ash figures out what's going on, he explains essentially the entire plot of Evil Dead and why things are going on the way they are. And Scotty just looks at him like, we all figured that out by now. And I've seen that a decent amount in even serious horror movies where they're just like, yeah, we already know. It's like, you don't have to sit here and explain it to us. We got it. And Simpsons used to do it all the time when they had a more complex plot.
One of the most glaring examples of this, and it wasn't even in a horror film, in Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. The Crystal Skull is an alien skull. We know this. We've known it for some time. We know it's aliens. We know it's aliens. We know it's... And the characters have no idea. And so there's this moment where they hold the skull up to this ruin on the wall, and they suddenly realize that, oh my gosh, this is an alien artifact. And there's a dramatic swell of orchestral music and everything that accompanies that. It's like, fucking duh! We knew that! Like, what took you so long?
There, as much as I enjoyed the movie Prometheus, and I have very few negative things to say about it, there was a reveal in that one that I literally... I refuse to talk during movies, especially in theaters, but I almost yelled. It was just like, because I actually heard people in the audience gasp. And I'm like, really? That surprised you? That? Because it was a relationship between two of the characters, and they put in that long dramatic pause that was way too long, and then the revelation came. This shouldn't have taken up this much of the movie to establish that if you've been paying even half attention, you can tell this person and that person relate in this particular way just through mannerisms and them talking.
To me, at least, when I see this happen, it's like you're treating the audience with kid gloves, and you're not trusting them with intelligence enough to be able to figure something out. Sometimes, obviously, people can't figure it out, and they gasp.
Yeah. And it was nothing against those girls. It was just like, how in the world did you not piece this together? And they were younger, I'm going to guess teens, preteens. So it's like maybe they just don't watch a lot of movies or watch a lot of TV. And that's a positive thing if you're a teenager. I guess, yes. You're out there doing productive things, I hope. More power to you on that one. Maybe they just are at an age where they're just starting to gather the different elements of storytelling. I remember when I was in high school and the remake of The Hills Have Eyes was coming out, and one of my classmates said that it was just a ripoff on Wrong Turn, and I was just like, props for getting the elements are the same, but inaccurate, you know. Hills Have Eyes was a movie with Michael Berryman many decades ago,
yes.
And it was being remade, and Wrong Turn just followed a similar story arc to it.
Though, at least in the remake of The Hills Have Eyes, we did get Ted Levine, Buffalo Bill himself, which frankly, if he was actually playing Buffalo Bill in The Hills Have Eyes, wouldn't have even been a fucking contest. He would have just killed everybody, and we wouldn't have had a movie.
I blame Silence of the Lambs on the fact that I always make this joke anytime there's discussion of male nudity. I'm just like, wait, you don't tuck it in and dance to Goodbye Horses? I always joke about that just because like that's such an iconic scene. It's one of the few horror jokes I can make that everybody gets across board. I'm just constantly referencing and joking movies that nobody gets, and I accept that about myself at this point.
And that's why, if you've been listening to this podcast, we do hope that you take the time to talk with us about them and leave comments here on the channel. And please, if you're listening to this and you haven't already, come over here from Blood Guts Social Commentaries channel, please go visit her page. There's a link to her YouTube here in the comments. And you also have your own Twitter account.
Yep. I am on pretty much every avenue of social media as Blood Guts SC. I try and be everywhere because, like I just said, I want to talk to people about these things. I want to either show people things they didn't already know about, or I want to have recommendations made of, what about this thing? It's like, oh, I don't know about that thing. I'm going to go find it now.
It's a thriving community where the exchange of ideas and opinions can not only bring new movies to you, but make you see old movies in different ways. And that is another wonderful reason to engage in the conversation. Hopefully, if you've already seen the movies that have been listed here, go back and watch them with fresh eyes. And like I had mentioned, how when I watched Tremors again, I realized they kill the Graboids in different ways each time. That's a really strong writing mechanic, and you don't pick up on that when you're watching it at first, but if you're looking at it critically, and I don't mean critically as in meaning to criticize, but just meaning to pick apart the various elements that make up the movie, you can come across things that just make you respect it even more. It's sometimes not as much. You can actually lose respect for a movie, but at least you understand more about what went into it. And that's what we hope that you will ultimately come away with and want to share and discuss. I'm
not sure how you watch for things, but I rarely have an angle when I'm going in because I just let this thing develop organically. I might have a vague idea of what category it might loosely fall into. Like I did an entire thing on killer poultry, and it ended up being this massive allegory with a bunch of musical elements for Native Americans. I'm like, wait, what? It's like, that was not something I expected to see in a connection, and it was there. When I was watching your video that you did about weaponized sound, I was expecting something about, like, I don't know, movie deaths that involved people being killed through, like, a sonic explosion or something, or, like, the decibel level causing their heads to explode, something like that. But no, this turned out to be far more interesting about... Oh, what the name of it is escaping me, with the radio booth and the radio tower? Pontypool. I was completely taken by that story, and I'm trying to track down a copy of the film now, because it was just a really interesting idea of a disease or a virus being carried through word. It seems like an obscure concept, and it is. It's a very unique one. But to put that forward in a film, and then try to find out how it's spreading, what's going on, weaponized sound in a very unique way, and it's one of the reasons why I enjoyed that video so much. I think that Pontypool might still be on Netflix if you're just looking to watch it. If you're looking for a hard copy, then yeah, obviously you have to buy it. And when I said earlier about, like, you don't have to be afraid of something to be horror, that movie was weird because it is the last time I felt claustrophobic at a film. The only film that made me feel as claustrophobic as Pontypool made me feel was Dark Star, where it was just like really tight angles and everything was so small and congested. It just completely gave this weird, crippling sense of claustrophobia. Well, there's a happy subject to close out on. That's the thing, I'm not even claustrophobic. But it's one of those, if you step back and really, obviously, every time you watch a movie for the first time, try and sit back and just enjoy it. But when you kind of step away and it's like, why is this making me feel this way? It takes away some of that scary element that drives a lot of people away from horror. A lot of people are just like, I don't like being scared. I'm like, that's perfectly fine to not like being scared, but you can still enjoy the elements of it without having to constantly be jumping and screaming and fearing for your life.
I don't like being scared. I have a lot of anxiety in my life anyway. The last thing I need is to be watching something that's going to cause more of that. But if I can watch something and respect the elements that make it up, or what it's trying to comment on, if it's societal commentary, bringing to light various issues, the plight of certain people, whatever, I can respect the film for what it's trying to do, regardless of how it's trying to scare me. Just like when it comes to a frightening video game, if the mechanics of it are something I like, or the story is something I like, I can deal with the jump scares just for the sake of being able to get through the story.
It reminds me of that scene from Labyrinth, where she just turns to him and says, "You have no power over me." And I'm like, that's what this is. You have no power over me.
In the former resort I used to work at that I mentioned before we started recording, there had the entire place was mostly ground level, and then the second story was all offices. And because this was a massive sprawling complex, those offices were like a fucking maze. And I went up there with one of my supervisors one time because we had to drop off some papers, and we're taking all these twists and turns. And it's like, Mike, I hope you put down some string or something, because I think you need to follow this thing, son of a bitch, back out. It's like, no, we'll be fine. It's like, Mike, no, seriously, we're going to fucking turn around a corner, and either one, there's going to be a Minotaur, or two, David Bowie's going to be there juggling his balls and saying, I'm never going to give my baby brother back. And fortunately, him being a big Labyrinth fan busted up laughing at that, but...
But so did you bring Cancel and Gretel GPS every other time you had to go by there, or?
No, I just sang Magic Dance. But the echolocation where it was bouncing off the walls, I just followed it back.
That's how you do things. Just repeat a phrase, and it works like echolocation.
It's perfect. See, it works. Unless you're repeating the word too many times, in which case you might be infected with the disease. I really like that video on that.
Yeah, because again, it's going back to that childhood thing of most kids repeat words and sentences and things like that until they're just completely incomprehensible. It just becomes babble, which makes sense because we start talking from a babble stage, so.
And speaking of babble, I think we've been babbling on enough. Oh god, why do I do this to myself with the puns?
Hey, I fully support puns, so.
Anyway, on those notes, I'd like to thank everybody for listening. Blood, thank you very much again for taking the time to be on this multi-part podcast. Is what's going to turn out to be when I'm done editing it.
Sorry.
No, very much appreciate all of your insight. I'd like to try to bring on people who are experts in their field or just have a wonderful working knowledge of things to be able to spread that information to others and enlighten me as well as people who are taking the time to check this out. So, bottom of my heart, thank you very much for joining me. And thank you for tuning in. Be back with more stuff. We're actually going to be trying to break things up into a 3 upload a week schedule. Miscellaneous Mondays, where I upload a critical cast, a response video, something like that. Gaming Wednesdays, where I'll be streaming live on Twitch for a while, and then re-uploading that broadcast to YouTube. And then Frasier Fridays, because that's, for some reason, still the bread and butter of this channel. You people love Frasier, and, I mean, I do it too, but you only started that show as a fucking whim, people, and you love it. So, thanks. We appreciate that. But anyway, Frasier Friday, and just repeat that process endlessly until I run out of things to talk about, or run out of Frasier episodes. But considering it's got 11 seasons, and we're only in the middle of Season 4, we still got time. So, with all that being said, please check out Blood's channel. Check out the Twitter for both her and for myself. You can find me at Critical Android. Share your opinions on what you think are some of the stronger horror films in those subsections that we discussed. But when it comes to the horror films, you know your shit.
Well, when it comes to Frasier, you know apparently your shit too. So we counterbalance each other in that way. Right.
Because there's all those counterbalances that you can see where people are weighing the weight of their knowledge of horror films against the weight of Frasier. It's
absolutely
common throughout numerous years in countries and people and places.
I mean, I'm thrilled to find another example of it. Just there's a plethora of them.
Yeah, aren't there? So for myself, the Critical Android, and my special guest, Blood, Guts, and Social Commentary, thank you all. We wish you a good day and pleasant dreams of Electric Sheep.